Miss Christina, or Domnișoara Cristina in Romanian, is a horror vampire novella written in 1936 by Mircea Eliade. It follows the story of the Moscu family who are haunted and tortured by the presence of a vampire. While they are having guests, just as summer turns into autumn, strange and unexplainable things start to happen. From the moody and absent host, Mrs. Moscu, the youngest daughter, who although only 9, acts as if she were a full-grown woman looking to defy and, at the same time, tempt the men around her, to the overall feeling of uneasiness the guests get as the nights pass on the property, and the unsettling dreams who bleed into reality, Eliade manages to create a captivating story, giving a new perspective over Romanian myths and legends and combining them with what was at the time of writing modernity. Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. So today I thought of doing like a Halloween special. I know I'm very late to the game and hopefully I'll be able to get this out before Halloween. Just for a bit of perspective, I'm filming this on the 28th of October and hopefully I'll be able to post it by the 31st. Of course, I've procrastinated. We know we all struggle with this. I'll just move on. Although I have to say that in Romania, our holiday that's kind of the equivalent of the Halloween is on the 30th of November. So it's between November and December rather than October and November. So from a Romanian perspective, I'm quite early. So when I was thinking what to talk about for Halloween, this novella was the first thing that came to my mind. So I've read it in high school, and what I remember about it is that I was completely hooked. It's a novella, but it's quite a long one. I think it has around 100 pages, something like that. So it's kind of at the cusp of being between a novella and a novel. And I remember reading it like 1 or 2 nights and staying up till 2 or 3 a.m. just to read it because that's how hooked I was by the story. I also think I don't know, it was a good pick, not only for the subject matter, which we'll get into, but also because Eliade is one of the Romanian writers who are known more internationally. He was born in 1907, if I remember correctly. If not, I'll just correct myself. In Romania, and he lived up until the 80s, I think 1986. As well as being a Romanian author, he was also a scholar and he studied the history of religion. So he lived in Romania throughout both wars, and during the Second World War, he had the luck, you could say, to be outside of the country. Now, after the Second World War, this is just a bit of Romanian history for you, Romania came under the communist regime. And during the interwar period, Eliade had pretty strong affiliation with the right parties and movements. He wrote for them, he went to prison because he supported them. So after the war and after the communists took over Romania, uh, due to his previous affiliations, it was quite dangerous for him to come back to the country because the people who were opposing the Communist Party in the interwar period were arrested, if not even killed. So he chose to stay abroad. He stayed in Paris for a few years. He taught there, and then he got an opportunity to teach at the University of Chicago. So he moved to the US, where he died. He wrote works in Romanian, in French, and I thought for that reason, since he lived in other countries, I thought his works would have more translations, especially Miss Christina, because it's quite, and we'll get to the story, but I think it's quite a commercial story, so it's very catchy, it's very captivating, it's easy to read. Of course, I'm not saying that it's shallow or superficial in any way, but it's a very catchy read, so I thought it would have more success over the seas. Maybe I was a bit too I had a bit too much faith. Nevertheless, if you're interested in reading this novella for yourself, I found one English translation. So there is a collection called Mystic Stories, the Sacred and the Profane by Mircea Eliade. It was published in 1992, though, so I don't think you'll find it in shops. You might find it secondhand or in libraries. But I must say I had a pretty easy time finding it online. And I'll leave it at that. So if you want to read it, it is quite accessible. And obviously, I'm talking about it, so I recommend you read it. I think it's a perfect read for Halloween. And if not for the Anglo-Saxon Halloween, then for the Romanian Halloween, which is on the 30th of November. This introduction out of the way, let's get into the novella itself. So the story starts with our main character, a young painter called Egor Pashkievich. Good luck pronouncing that if you're not Romanian, who is a guest at the Moscu house, at the Moscu property. And at the beginning of the story, he meets the second guest the family have, who is called Mr. Nazarie, and who is a university professor and an archaeologist. They all come together at the beginning for a meal where we get to interact and see the strange dynamic between the family, and also we get with this eerie feeling that there's something going on there that people aren't talking about. So the Moscow family is quite odd because they don't have any male member and no husband is ever mentioned. It's made of three women, Mrs. Moscow and her two daughters, Sanda, who is the oldest one, and then Simina, who is the youngest one, who is only 9. So as I said, from the beginning, they appear as quite odd, not only because of the absence of the masculine, of a masculine presence, but also because Mrs. Moscow seems quite distant and absent from conversations. She doesn't seem to have the capacity to follow what the guests are talking about, although she wants to be involved and she wants to be polite. On the other hand, Simina, despite only being 9, she has this, what I would call, seductive naughtiness about her. Up to a certain point, she behaves like you'd expect any spoiled child to behave. She talks back. She is quite rude because she doesn't have her manners down. But at the same time, in all of these gestures, the guests can see something more than just a child being a child. She has this flirty and playful attitude about her, almost as if she were inviting the guests in her little flirt. The most normal out of the trio is the eldest daughter, Sanda. She is the one who tries to keep up the appearances of her family and tries to, bring some kind of normality for the sake of the guests. She also seems to have something going on with Egor, although when it comes to Egor, he doesn't seem to have very serious intentions. Frankly speaking, he didn't quite know if he was actually in love with Sanda, as Mr. Nazaria has stressed in his question. He liked the girl, a brief fling, even a love affair. That was what he was joyfully looking for. Sanda was intimately associated with his artistic profession, with his unavowed ambitions. A sincere answer would have been difficult. Judging by this quote, we can understand why Sanda is cold towards Egor, because as I said, she's trying to keep up this appearance. She's trying to be a proper young lady. Who wouldn't just give herself away without the promise of a more serious relationship, who would most likely end in marriage. In the whole eerie atmosphere that we have at this first table, Sanda seems to be the most grounded one, as the guests are trying to navigate the weirdness of this family. As the first night comes, Egor and Mr. Nazaria find themselves unable to sleep, and they meet in Egor's room to talk and to try to get rid of insomnia. While they're speaking, though unaware of the source of this feeling, both of them have this sensation that they're being watched. There is an intangible presence with them. However, since there's nothing to rationalize their uneasiness, they choose to overlook these feelings and they just go on talking and eventually go to sleep. So she shows herself in Simina's dreams, and this brings the topic of her at the table. The family has a life-size portrait painted by a painter called Mira, who was a real Romanian painter. And after Simina mentions Miss Christina coming in her dreams, they decide to take the two guests to what was Christina's room and show them the portrait. The two guests have quite different reactions to seeing Christina for the first time, and I'll read them to you. Mr. Nazaria felt terror, like a grip in his breast. Miss Christina was smiling out of Mira's painting, as if she were looking right at him. She was a very young girl, attired in a full dress, long and slim in the waist, black curls hanging low upon her shoulders. He feels watched by the painting, but his impression is quite shallow. He just notices her beautiful and eerie appearance. Now, Egor, on the other side, Egor was standing away from the portrait. He was trying to realize the source of so much melancholy and weariness in his soul while facing this virgin who looked him straight in the eyes, intimately smiling, as if she had chosen him out of the whole group to confess to him alone her endless loneliness. There was much yearning and much sorrow in Miss Christina's eyes. So we see that more than feeling like he's being singled out by Christina, like Mr. Nazaria feels, he also sees in him all these feelings of melancholy, of loneliness, of sorrow and yearning. And as we get to to know Egor more and more, we can safely assume that these are less Christina's feelings and more Egor's own feelings that he projects onto the portrait. Because isn't that what we all do with art? We project our feelings onto this piece of art that we have in front of us. And I think that makes sense because everything he describes, everything he sees in Christina's portrait, can describe his own state. So I've said he's a painter, but another crucial detail about him is that he seems to be going through an artist block. So he cannot really paint. He came to the Moscow property because he wanted to get over it. He wanted to get inspiration to paint, and we're told that he keeps walking around the property carrying his painting supplies, but he cannot really paint anything. So we can imagine that he must be quite frustrated. He must be feeling quite lonely at the same time, since he has this, since he cannot express himself through his art. So it's these feelings that I feel like he's projecting onto Christina's portrait, but at the same time, this is quite crucial for him because when he sees the portrait, he says that the original painter didn't do her justice. So the moment he sees Christina for the first time, he finds a source of inspiration. After seeing the portrait, obviously the two guests are quite intrigued by Christina as a character, and they are still followed by the uneasiness they felt the previous night. So Mr. Nazaria goes to talk to some peasants to find out some more information about Christina, and here is where we find out her backstory and also about her untimely death. So she is told to have had a romantic relationship with her bailiff, and at the same time she would ask him to torture peasants in front of her. So she had this kind of masochistic desire to see people suffering in front of her. Now, at the beginning of the 20th century, there were some peasant rebellions, and because she wanted to avoid her house being trampled by peasants and her being potentially killed, she decided to invite the peasants in the house and share the wealth with them. Only besides giving away her wealth, she also gave away her body. So the peasants recall that she would wait for them naked on the ground and let them abuse her, basically, which made her bailiff jealous, and that's how she found her. And the bailiff, seeing the way she acted and seeing her give away her body so freely to the peasant, shot her dead out of jealousy. Her body was never found, and that is the reason why her presence is still felt around on the property and in the communities of peasants around it. The night after they find out about Christina and her backstory, Egor sees her for the first time, first in his dream, and then she also comes in his room. Before seeing Christina, though, he first sees an old friend who also had an untimely death and who died a few years back, who warns him of the fact that he is in grave danger at the property. Egor ignores his warning and he goes on with the dream, seeing these ballrooms with parties and dances and seeing Christina for the first time, who is surrounded by a smell of violets. And after he wakes up, he also sees Christina for the first time in his room. So we have this blend between what is the dream world and what is the real world. While visiting Egor, Christina also denies what Nazaria said about her backstory, trying to be sweet and flirty with Egor. The following 2 nights, she keeps appearing in his room and in his dreams, each time getting closer and closer to the painter. So if the first time is just an apparition and she leaves a glove, the second time she starts taking control over Egor's thoughts, and Egor starts to hear Christina's thoughts in his mind, making him doubt what's his wish and what isn't. And the third time, she comes to him in his room to make him her lover, which is her ultimate goal. As Christina's influence goes stronger and stronger on Egor, it's also seen and felt on the people around her. Mrs. Moscu starts to get even more distracted and tired. Simina, from her flirty, playful nature, she starts to become more vulgar and violent. She pressed her mouth on his, biting into his lips. Egor felt unspeakable happiness, heavenly and holy in his flesh. His forehead backwards, he abandoned himself to that kiss of blood and honey. The little girl had crushed his lips, wounding them. Her unripe body remained cold, slim, fresh. Feeling blood, Simina lapped it thirstily. Sanda, the oldest daughter, becomes sick with a mystery illness which seems like it's going to kill her. While Egor is lured by Christina and by everything that happens, he still has his feelings for Sanda and wants to save her and to protect her from all the weirdness that's going on. So to do that, they get engaged. He makes this step of making their relationship official and promises Sanda that the next day they're going to be out of there and he's going to protect her. However, the engagement is doomed to fail because Egor cannot resist Christina's temptation. On that third night, that when she comes to him, he invites her in, and they start consummating their love. Everything seems to be going great. Well, as great as love with a dead immortal being can be, but again, Egor is caught in this this illusion and this fantasy he has of Christina, who is this perfect immortal being that he aspires to be with, until he feels her gunshot wound. So that is the moment that makes him snap back to reality and shatters his whole fantasy. I'm not going to tell you how the story ends because I truly encourage you to read the story for yourself. I promise you, you won't. I promise you, you won't regret it. Eliade has always been interested in myths, legends, and spirituality. So it's no wonder that he chose to draw from Romanian mythology in order to create his story. If I were to ask you, what do you know about Romania? Probably one of the first things that would come to your mind is vampires. Since Bram Stoker's novel, and thanks to and thanks to many other pieces of media, that being books, films, series, and so on, Romania kind of became the vampire country. However, as you can imagine, the commercial image of a vampire that you can imagine is quite different from what we have in our mythology. So in Romanian culture, vampires are known as strigoi. I don't know if this word has a translation. I'll look for it and I'll put it on somewhere around the screen. But to honor my culture and my language, I'm going to use the word strigoi. So this is the Romanian version of a vampire. There's quite a few similarities between strigoi and vampires. The main one being that they're both undead creatures who live in this liminal space between life and death, and who bring some kind of harm to the people and the communities that live around them. According to Romanian mythology, there are multiple ways you can become a strigoi. As a baby, you can become a strigoi if you are stillborn, you are aborted, you are the result of an incestuous relationship between, I don't know, cousins, brothers, or something like that. Or if your mother goes out at night without covering her head while she's pregnant with you, which makes her obviously vulnerable to Satan, who can go, I don't know, inside of her and transform the baby into a strigoi. As a grown-up, there are basically two main ways you can become one. So first is if you aren't buried properly. So there are multiple things that can go wrong. So either you don't have a ceremony at all, or something goes wrong at your ceremony. This something going wrong could be, as simple as a black cat going under your casket or stepping over you. Or the last way to become one is to basically be a huge asshole during your lifetime. And Christina from the novella fits in these two last categories. So first, she's not buried properly because nobody knows where her body is. So obviously there was no kind of ceremony to make sure that her soul gets to the world of the dead. And also, she was this masochist woman who derived pleasure out of seeing others and being herself tortured. Like with vampires, the legends around Strigoi seems to have appeared as a way to explain terrible phenomena that would harm entire communities, so such as disease, famine, droughts, and so on. And since people didn't have a scientific understanding of these things, they would create stories around them in order to explain it. And with the story, you also need to have some ways to protect yourself from the strigoi. In Romanian myth, there's also the solution of stabbing the body of the strigoi with a stake. It's not doesn't necessarily have to be specifically a wooden one, or using garlic. Now this garlic tradition is tied to what I was telling you is the Romanian Halloween. So it is believed that on the night of the 30th of November, so between November and December, the spirits, the bad spirits, are free to roam on the world of the living. So if you want to protect your house from the spirit coming in and bringing about all sorts of disaster, what you do is you hang some garlic around your house to deflect the spirits. And here is where the belief that that vampires don't like garlic and they are repelled by garlic comes from. So you can use it to protect yourself from strigois. What's also interesting to point out, and something that's present in this novella, is that this mythology obviously was present in Romanian culture and consciousness before the influence of the church. And there were times, and which still happens, when Christian beliefs blend in with pagan ones. Although at that time and now too, the church is quite serious about disproving and discouraging people to believe that. But obviously, it's very difficult to just replace a system of beliefs with others. So they will inevitably blend. While I was, I don't know, reading about this, I found that there is a record of a priest helping some people in a village to exhume a body who was believed to be a strigoi and stab him in order to get rid of a plague that was going on at that time in those villages. And this happened in at the beginning of the 19th century. So obviously those legends were still very much present in the Romanian consciousness. Now, Eliade didn't only draw from Romanian mythology to build his story, he was also inspired by historical events. So the peasant rebellions that I was telling you about, when Christina chose to share her wealth and her body with the peasants to avoid being killed, that those actually happened at the beginning of the 20th century. I don't want to get too much into detail when it comes to the history, mainly because I don't know it very well myself. But basically, the way the legislation worked at that time and the way land was distributed between landlords, it made it very difficult for peasants to make a living, basically. And in order to live, to have something to put on the table, they had to go to indebt themselves to the landlords. The landlords had a piece of land, they would give it to the peasants to farm it, and then they would take the crops and take the profit, and the peasants would get a very small part of that profit. Sometimes also getting their own piece of land to work in order to get food. But what happened, since they were so indebted to their landlords, they had to work so hard in order to, I don't know, make profit for the landlords and to pay off their debt, that they weren't able to work their own land and sustain themselves, basically. So they were in a pretty bad situation. Obviously, people don't rebel for having a good time. So this actually happened. They would go into I don't know, noblesmen houses and steal from them, demanding for a better life. This is very much what also happens in the novella, and it also brings into discussion this class conflict between the noblemen, the landlords who have the land, have the money, have the power, and the peasants who are forced to work for them because they have nothing else to do. And I feel like this power play between classes is continued in the power play between Christina and the people, all the people around her, because she influences and negatively impacts all the people that are on that property. Another element of Romanian culture that is very present in Eliade's novella is a poem by one of our most famous poets called Mihai Eminescu, this guy right here. The poem in Romanian is called Luceafărul, and the translations from what I've seen varied. So you can find it as the morning star, you can find it as the evening star. So Luceafărul is, we call the star, I think it's planet Venus. I'll have to fact check myself on that. But it's basically the first star that appears in the sky at night and the last star to go out in the morning. So the morning star, the evening star. In this particular translation of the novella, because the title of the poem is mentioned, you'll find it as Lucifer. I want to speak a bit on that because the poem itself is not necessarily tied to what we generally think of when you hear Lucifer. So seeing Luceafărul like that in Eminescu's poem can definitely be an interpretation, but it's not necessarily, I don't know, the intention or the ultimate interpretation. However, it makes sense to see it like this in Eliade's novella, because here we have a case of a demonic influence, so an evil one. In Eminescu's poem, however, it's an epic poem that tells the story of a young girl called Catalina who falls in love with the morning star or the evening star, however you want to call it. Despite the star reciprocating the girl's affection, obviously, since they come from different worlds, their love can never become a reality. So it's either Catalina has to come to him and become immortal, or he has to come and become mortal. But neither of the two characters want to give up their state of being to be with the other. There are a lot of different interpretations, and it's a poem that's very widely discussed in Romanian literary discourse. I don't want to get into that, but it is mentioned in the novella, and it's relevant because the relationship between Christina and Egor reflects the relationship between the star and girl. Only this time the genders are flipped. So we have Christina, who is this immortal being coming from down below rather than from up above, and who falls in love with Egor, who himself also falls in love with her, having this fantasy of a sort of love that's out of this world. There are some lines from the poem that are also repeated throughout the novella, because I think Eliade chose them because they kind of show the destructive nature of this sort of passion and longing. So wanting to be with someone, wanting to love someone that's not from your I don't know, your realm. And the verses go like this: my heartstrings ache when every eve you vent your cruel desire. Your eyes, so gloomy, make me grieve, and scorching is their fire. So obviously we see in these lines reflected. I don't know how else to call it other than the destructive nature that this affection has on both characters, because they both have to sacrifice something in order to be with each other. And in Christina's case, she says, it's not clear, so Eliade doesn't give too many details on that, but she says, you shall never understand what I've done for you, Egor. You can't appreciate my courage if you knew the curse I'm laboring under, love with a mortal. At the same time, Egor also has to sacrifice his relationship with Sanda, because he does have to make this choice between having a normal relationship, or having this fantasy of loving an immortal, perfect being. Now, at the end, I'd like to also speak a little bit about what's kind of my interpretation and what I don't know, I chose to focus on this time I've read the novella. This time for me, the novella was very much about artist's condition, because we have Egor as the main character, so he is at the center of the novella. He's also the first character we meet. He's the one interacting with Christina. We have this artist who is struggling, who is looking for something. He wants to get over his block, and like every artist, he aspires towards something that's untouchable and unreachable, and a representation of that for him becomes Christina, because she is this very beautiful, ethereal being that's kind of a promise of reaching a sort of absolute that artists generally aspire to. So, as much as he wants to do the right thing, he wants to save Senda, and he tries to fight Christina's pool at the beginning, his very condition makes him vulnerable to her. Because as opposed to Nazarie, who is a scientist, an archaeologist, so he's just there to learn about the myths, to note them down, to study them, Igor is more interested in chasing this fantasy that Christina's presence promises him. Her love represents this intangible thing that all artists aspire to, and many or some of them would give their life for. And this is Egor's case, because we see him at some point, he doesn't really care about what's going to happen to him. He doesn't care about his friend who came from the dead to warn him. He doesn't care about Senda or what's going on with anything else. She's just focused on the chase of that intangible and that fantasy of reaching the absolute. Obviously, this reverie is short-lived, because, as I said, as soon as he touches Christina's gunshot wound, he is brought back to the ugly reality. So this whole illusion of the perfect muse that would help him reach the absolute through his art is completely shattered by the reality of the cursed being that Christina actually is. So this is my take on it. Now, in conclusion, I think Miss Christina is one of those pieces of writing that can be for everybody, because you can just see it as an entertaining horror novella that just keeps you reading as I don't know, as the hours of the night progress, and you start feeling like Christina is there in the room with you. But it also has all these elements of mythology, legends, and history, and Romanian literature that you can analyze and you can interpret in all sorts of different ways. So it was my choice and kind of my intuition this time to focus on Egor as the main character and his struggle as an artist. But obviously, you might as well focus on Christina as the main character, because she is kind of odd if you think about it. So she is a woman who has power over some land. So that wasn't really common at the beginning of the 20th century, and her power, and she also is a woman vampire. Which is less common. Usually vampires are male figures, so you can talk about that. I think you can also take a feminist approach to it, looking at how you have this property that is managed by women and that is cursed. So what's that about? I think you could look into that. But like I said, you can also choose to just stop at I don't know, at the story level and just enjoy it for what it is. A captivating and quite a scary story. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Since it's a piece of Romanian literature, I don't know, I feel like it's closer to my heart, obviously, because I'm Romanian, and that's why I also wanted to mention elements from other areas of Romanian culture, like history and literature. Again, if you want to look for the translation, you will find it online. And stay tuned, because my next video, which I don't know when it's going to come out, because I haven't started working on it yet, but I know it's going to be about Wuthering Heights. So I've talked briefly about Wuthering Heights last year, saying that I hated it. We'll see if my opinion changed or not. But if you'd care to stick around and wait for around a month, hopefully not more than that, yes, I will have an in-depth analysis of, hopefully an in-depth analysis of Wuthering Heights. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in my next one. Bye!